Think about everything you did today to not stink. You probably showered, put on deodorant, brushed your teeth, maybe some perfume or cologne. We are, as a species, absolutely obsessed with not smelling like ourselves. Now here's the thing, for almost the entire history of humanity, not one single one of those things existed. No deodorant, no daily showers, no toothpaste, no minty mouthwash, none of it. Billions of people lived their entire lives from birth to death without ever doing any of the stuff you did before breakfast. So the big, slightly horrifying question is, what did our ancestors actually smell like? And here's the twist, the answer is way more surprising and way funnier than just really, really bad. First, let's clear up what body odor even is, because it's not quite what people think. Sweat itself is actually mostly odorless. The real culprit is bacteria. Your skin, especially in warm, damp places like your armpits, is covered in tiny bacteria that feast on your sweat, and it's their waste products that create that classic funky smell. Now, here's the important part. Humans have always sweated, and we've always had these bacteria. Which means every human who has ever lived, going all the way back to the first cave dwellers, had some degree of body odor. Our ancestors definitely had a smell. They would have carried the scent of sweat, of the smoky fires they huddled around constantly, of the earth, of the animals they hunted, and of whatever they'd been eating. In terms of raw aroma, yeah, they were pungent. Now for the twist that changes everything. They almost certainly didn't think they stank. And this comes down to a fascinating quirk of your own nose. Your sense of smell is designed to notice changes, not constants. When you walk into a bakery, the smell is amazing and overwhelming for about 2 minutes. Then your nose simply tunes it out and you stop noticing it. It's called olfactory adaptation. Now apply that to the ancient world. Everybody smelled roughly the same, like sweat, smoke, and earth. There was no contrast, no one walking around smelling like a spring meadow to make everyone else seem gross by comparison. Since everyone was marinating in the same background aroma all the time, their noses would have completely adapted to it. It wasn't stinky to them. It was just the normal, invisible background smell of being a human being. They probably didn't notice it at all, any more than you notice the smell of your own home. Okay, so now we have to bust a huge popular myth, the idea that everyone in the past was just uniformly filthy, and that history is one long march from disgusting to clean. That's completely wrong. The truth is that cleanliness varied enormously depending on when and where you lived. Some ancient cultures were absolutely obsessed with being clean and smelling good in ways that would impress you today. Other, later societies were genuinely grimy. It wasn't a straight line at all. Humanity actually got cleaner, then dirtier, then cleaner again, bouncing around wildly across different eras and civilizations. So let's take a tour through history's nose, and you'll see that some of your ancestors smelled a lot better than you'd ever guess. Let's start with a culture that was shockingly into cleanliness, the ancient Romans. For the Romans, bathing wasn't just about getting clean, it was a central part of daily life and socializing. They built enormous, magnificent public bathhouses where people would gather to soak, relax, exercise, and gossip, often every single day. Now, their method was a little different from ours. They didn't really have soap as we know it. Instead, they'd rub their bodies with oil, and then use a curved metal tool called a strigil to scrape all the oil, sweat, and grime right off their skin. A bit gross to picture, sure, but surprisingly effective at getting clean. The Romans also loved perfumes and scented oils. So a well-off Roman citizen, freshly scraped and oiled up, could plausibly have smelled better than plenty of people do today. Not quite the barbaric filth you might have imagined. The Romans weren't alone. Go back even further to ancient Egypt, and you find another culture that took cleanliness and smelling good extremely seriously. The Egyptians bathed regularly, and famously, many of them shaved off most of their body hair, partly for hygiene and to keep cool, and partly to fight off lice. They were also masters of perfume. Precious scented substances like myrrh and frankincense weren't just luxury goods. They were burned as incense and worn on the body, deeply tied to both daily life and religious ritual. Wealthy Egyptians reportedly even wore cones of scented fat on their heads at parties, which would slowly melt in the heat and release a pleasant fragrance down over them all evening. Basically a wearable, slow-release perfume. These were people who genuinely cared about how they smelled, thousands upon thousands of years ago. Now let's jump to the era people love to imagine as the peak of filth, the Middle Ages. We picture medieval peasants caked in mud, having never once touched water. But that's another exaggeration. Medieval people were cleaner than their reputation suggests. They generally valued being tidy and regularly washed their hands and faces, especially before eating. Many towns had public bathhouses where people would go to soak, and being clean was often associated with being a good, respectable person. They used herbs and flowers to freshen their homes, their clothes, and themselves. Now, to be fair, they didn't bathe their whole bodies as often as we do, and full immersion was more of an occasional event than a daily one. So they weren't spotless by our standards. But the image of the universally filthy, water-fearing medieval peasant is more of a myth than a reality. Here's a belief that shaped how people dealt with smell for centuries, and it's completely bonkers by modern standards. For most of history, nobody knew that germs, tiny invisible microbes, were what actually caused disease. So they came up with a different explanation, called miasma theory. The idea was that bad smells themselves were dangerous. People believed that foul-smelling bad air, rising from rotting matter, swamps, and filth, literally carried disease and could make you sick just by being breathed in. This had a huge consequence. Masking bad odors with pleasant ones wasn't seen as mere vanity. It was seen as protecting your health. If a nasty smell could kill you, then surrounding yourself with strong, pleasant fragrances was basically medicine. This is why, during outbreaks of the plague, those famous plague doctors wore beak-like masks and stuffed the beaks full of sweet-smelling herbs and flowers to filter out the deadly bad air. This brings us to what might be the smelliest paradox in history: the grand royal courts of Europe, a few centuries ago, in places like the Palace of Versailles. You'd think the richest, most glamorous people on earth would be the cleanest. Nope. This was an era when, in parts of Europe, full-body bathing had actually fallen out of fashion, driven by a strange fear that water and open pores could let disease into the body. So these lavish aristocrats, dripping in silk and jewels, often washed their actual bodies surprisingly rarely. Their solution: drown themselves in perfume. They used heavy, powerful fragrances not to complement cleanliness, but to cover up the smell of not washing. So picture the glittering court of Versailles, incredibly wealthy people in gorgeous gowns, in a magnificent palace that, underneath all the expensive perfume, may have smelled genuinely rank. Wealth and a pleasant smell, it turns out, did not always go together. But what about the other big one, their breath? Surely, with no toothpaste and no dentists, everyone in the past had rotten, disgusting teeth and terrible breath, right? Well, once again, the reality is more nuanced and surprising. It's true they had no toothpaste as we know it, but people were not just ignoring their teeth. Across many cultures, folks cleaned their teeth using clever tools. They'd chew on frayed chew sticks from certain trees, which worked like a natural toothbrush, or rub their teeth with cloth and various powders made from things like crushed shells, herbs, or charcoal. And here's the genuinely shocking part. In many ancient societies, people actually had healthier teeth and fewer cavities than we do. Why? Sugar. Ancient diets contained far less sugar than our modern one, and sugar is the #1 villain behind tooth decay. So an ancient hunter-gatherer, chewing on a stick and eating a low-sugar diet, may well have had a healthier mouth than a modern person raised on soda and candy. So if humans smelled like humans for hundreds of thousands of years and mostly didn't care, when did we become so absolutely terrified of our own natural scent? The answer is, shockingly, recently. Deodorant and antiperspirant, as products you buy and apply every day, are essentially inventions of the last 100 and some years. And for a long time after they were invented, most people didn't even use them or see the point. What really changed everything wasn't science, it was advertising. In the early 20th century, companies selling these new products faced a challenge. How do you sell a solution to a problem people don't think they have? Their answer was genius and a little evil. They ran advertising campaigns designed to make people, especially women, feel deeply ashamed and anxious about their natural body odor, to convince you that you secretly stank, that everyone could smell it, and that it was quietly ruining your life and your relationships. and it worked spectacularly. They essentially manufactured our modern insecurity about smelling like a person. So let's finally answer the question directly. What did ancient humans actually smell like? The honest answer is, they smelled like people plus their world. A base layer of natural body odor, sweat, and bacteria mixed with the strong sense of their environment. Wood smoke almost always because fire was constant. The animals they lived and worked with, the specific foods of their region, the earth, the plants, the tanned leather they wore. Depending on the era and culture, that might be topped with perfume and scented oils, or overlaid with the herbs they used, or in some unlucky times and places, mingled with the genuine stench of a crowded, pre-plumbing city. To our hyper-sanitized modern noses, most of them would probably smell strong, earthy, and smoky. But to each other, they mostly just smelled like normal, everyday human beings, which is exactly what they were. And there's a genuinely interesting lesson buried in all of this. Our modern idea that a human body should smell like nothing, or like ocean breeze or mountain spring, is not some timeless truth about being clean. It's a very recent, very specific cultural invention, sold to us largely by companies with something to gain. For the vast majority of human history, smelling like a human was simply the default state of existence, and nobody thought twice about it. Your ancestors, going back countless generations, all had a natural scent, and they lived full, rich, complicated lives without a stick of deodorant among them. So the next time you catch a whiff of yourself after a long day and feel a flash of embarrassment, just remember, that smell is the most natural, ancient, and human thing about you. Every single one of your ancestors had it too. So there you have it. Our ancestors smelled of sweat and smoke and earth and the world around them, sometimes masked with perfume, sometimes not. And for the most part, they had absolutely no idea they smelled like anything at all, because everyone around them smelled the same. History wasn't a simple journey from filthy to fresh. It bounced from the scraped and oiled Romans to the perfumed but unwashed nobles of Versailles, all the way to our modern, ad-fueled terror of our own armpits. The truth is, the way we smell and how we feel about it says more about our culture than about cleanliness itself. You are the first humans in history to expect to smell like nothing at all. Your ancestors would find that absolutely baffling. If you love history that's true, strange, and told to you straight, subscribe. We've got a whole world of it. See you in the next one.